First off, I'd like to thank the organisers for very, very kindly inviting me over here. As we mentioned at our last meeting, I've been wanting an excuse to come to Berlin for several years, and this is the first time anyone offered to pay for me to come, so it's great. Thank you very much appreciated. And I need to apologise straight away because my German extends to ordering beer and pizza and that's it, and that's not going to go down terribly well here. So, it's going to be in English, so apologies for that. And also apologies for my poor English, because if you recognise my accent, you'll realise that I'm a Londoner. So I speak English probably differently to the way that you learnt it. So apologies for that. And if you find that you can't understand me or follow me, I put these on there on the table, so please throw them at me. That's what they're there for. Okay? The other thing I'd like to point out is, as Matteo says, we do have a very wide digital classicist community, and it is an international community. And we generally use the hashtag DigiClass. If anybody's live tweeting, please do. And if there's any tweeters out there, please use the hashtag I've put up on the board. Well, Matteo's introduction covers pretty much what I do. I'm, Program Director for a Master's Program in Digital Humanities at UCL. I've also got a couple of other names up on here. This is Ulrich, my colleague, and one of our Associate Directors for the Centre, and Davor is one of my Master's students from last year, and some of the material I've got in here comes from them. What I want to talk about really is the synergy between research and teaching. Most of my activities, other than being program director and the duties that involves, is in teaching and delivering content to the students. It allows me really to integrate teaching and research together. Right? And these are some of the things I'm going to talk about today. I've put a series of bullet points on the slides. And also later on you'll find that they're screenshots, because I never trust doing anything live as a demo. So I put screenshots up there. But I have actually embedded links and made them live in all the screenshots. So depending how you have this uploaded, you should be able to just click on the URLs at the top of the screenshots, and it should take you to the pages. I want to talk about, the teaching I do, what comes out of the MA/MSc program, something about the open educational resources, but also about changing practices and changing cultures within the academy as well. And think about some ways to go forward. And of course this is Digital Classicist, so we've got to focus towards the end actually on classics. This is what we do. You can find out all about our program online. I've got some flyers here, so I'm not going to talk about that, right? You'll be pleased to hear. But it is a new program. We are actively involved in our centre in digital humanities projects and research projects, so we do research on that. We have development of research projects, and we publish on all of those things. But importantly, also it enables me to publish and to do research and publish actually on teaching as well. So it's not only about research projects, but also about teaching too. I got involved in this open education resources at UCL for a variety of reasons, but one of those was it gave me the ability to do all three as part of my job. We've been, and I presented on this topic at national and international conferences. I have publications in it, as well as building teaching resources themselves. This is the first slide up there. This is the name of the project. It's DHOER, Digital Humanities Open Educational Resources. And it's about taking the teaching materials and making them freely and openly available online for people to use. They are sitting in a UK resources repository called Humbox, and I'm going to be showing you that a little bit later on. But one of the questions that come up is in my teaching area. It's digital humanities, but we're in the Department of Information Studies. So it's modules and topics around information. But these are not necessarily very disciplinary specific. So these are not resources that are only applicable to teaching and learning for digital humanities, but also spin off to a lot of other cognitive disciplines as well. And this is one of the decisions you have to make. Am I going to make my resources dedicated and very, very specifically for one particular discipline, or am I going to make them applicable to many other disciplines? And one of the purposes here is that they should not be only for teaching within our department. To give you an example, extracted from my modules, there are teaching materials and learning materials on things like copyright, freedom of information, data protection, social media, open access, all these general sorts of things. It's not only technical stuff in there. Indeed, I don't know too much technical stuff. Those of you that know me will know that. Yeah. I put this slide up here for Uli, my colleague, because this is one of his favourites when we talk about these things. It's really all about making the material open and freely available. And there's no great change here to what we've always done in the academy in teaching, because we've always had a situation where we would share teaching materials across the department, across different programs. Here, we're formalising it, and we're putting them out there online for other people to use as well. And to an extent, they then become publications again in their own right. The whole issue of open access and open publishing is very core for digital humanities, and it's also very core for us in digital classicists as well. All our material, when it possibly can be, is open. I give you again the screenshot for the Public Library of Science, which is where that last quote comes from, and that has additional relevance, of course, because 2 weeks' time it's Open Access Week. Yes? Yeah. So go and check that out there as well. Screenshot for them. Open educational resources, I'll explain a little bit more about what exactly I mean by that a little later on, but it's nothing new. This is the screenshot from the UNESCO webpage on OERs, and you can trace it really back to about 2000, so that's 13 years. It was introduced by UNESCO at a conference in 2000. And you need to remember that the E in UNESCO stands for education. United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Become a global movement over the years, and again, the big player early on in this was MIT, with the introduction in 2001 of the OpenCourseWare. The UNESCO definition here is the one that I generally use and the one that I like, which simply says open education resources are teaching, learning or research materials in the public domain, or released with an intellectual property license that allows for free use, adaptation and distribution. And those last two words are important, adaptation and distribution as well. Some milestones. I'm not going to give you a history of OER. I'm not even going to argue for its importance. I'm going to assume that, and that's my assumption here. But we can go back further than the 2000 UNESCO conference to 1998, OpenCourseWare Initiative. Again, MIT OpenCourseWare comes online 2002. Also we have Creative Commons 2002. OpenLearn, the Open University in the UK, shout out for them, 2006. And Cape Town, big players in southern Africa here. And I give you the dates at the bottom there, and this is the UK. This is the Higher Education Academy and JISC funded projects to actually generate and disseminate resources for education openly. Pilot project 2009-10, and then following years phase 2 and phase 3. But again, this is only part of the story, because this fits within a wider picture and a wider framework of open access. And because we're in Berlin, of course, I've included that one in there for you. But again, look back to 2002, 2003, the Budapest Bethesda Statement of Open Access Publishing, and then the Berlin Declaration 2003 on open access to knowledge in the science and humanities. It's part of an increase in the overall culture of open access and open access materials, and a move away from having to pay for content and having your content restricted behind paywalls and subscription sites. This is a project I was involved in here. This is one specifically at UCL, and it's using basically my teaching materials. But we actually have several projects at UCL. Perhaps not as many as you would expect for such a large institution, but there are three main ones. The one at the top is mine. These are in reverse chronological order, as in the way of a blog. So that's my one at the top there. Two others there. There's one on the teaching and higher education, teaching and learning. So this is material for teacher training within the academy. And the bottom one is Uli's project on open learn. Indeed, Ulrich and myself have been in discussions with UCL libraries about setting up a repository for UCL. To be clear, that's not because we need another repository. There are lots of repositories out there. The issue is that what we want to do is we want to make it part of the normal workflow, exactly the same way as an institutional publications repository is now. So we want to make the saving and archiving and making available of teaching materials to be part of the normal, regular practice of educators at UCL. This one is Ulrich's project, which is open learning. He's one of our associate directors. He was, up until recently, head of the Dutch department. He's a Dutch historian. But it's quite a marginalised area, particularly with language teaching. And one of the reasons this came about is that this teaching area of modern languages is vulnerable, exactly in the way that teaching of Greek and Latin, unfortunately, in the UK is vulnerable. So is modern languages invulnerable. And this came about with the main institutions that had strong Dutch programs, UCL, Cambridge, Sheffield and Nottingham, actually coming together and creating an online resource, sharing their material amongst themselves, bringing together their teaching material to actually share resources, bring more breadth to the curriculum. Importantly, for language learning. This is a project in COLT, which is the staff teaching and training centre. One of the issues I want to raise is that open education resources continue to be relatively unused in most educational programs. I'm making the assumption, perhaps wrongly, does anybody here use open education resources in their teaching? No, okay, that's fine. That was my assumption. Otherwise, the worry was afterwards over wine, somebody's going to come up and say something. Okay, so I'm really introducing this to you. They are relatively unused in education programs. One of the questions is why is this? Right? Is it due to a general lack of awareness what these are, what you can do with them, where you can find them, particularly at the more traditional higher education institutions? Is it, on the other hand, is it an unwillingness perhaps to use other people's material for your teaching? Does that perhaps undervalue you? Or is it that by releasing your material and making it freely available, there's some way a loss of ownership? You're giving away your precious teaching material. Yeah? Another alternative is this an institutional issue? Is it that the employers, the university, claim copyright on the employee's work, the lecturer's work, and say it's theirs and you cannot give it away, and they prevent it being freely released? I don't know. These are questions. I don't know what the answer is. I would argue that producing resources and releasing them of open education resources is actually not enough. What we need to do is to develop a community of practice around the creation and around the reuse of these. The use of reusable learning objects and materials, along with the ongoing practice of developing new ones, needs to become part of the training of teachers at all levels. That's the importance of this one, because it's using open education resources in the teaching of the probationary lecturers and teaching staff, which is mandatory in UK institutions. So it's becoming part of the workflow for the people that's coming in. So hopefully they will carry on and generate and use it themselves. For our project, we've got creating the resources, we've got a range of material, not just for digital humanities teaching, but beyond, and making them available. Then you have to decide, are we talking about 4 modules? Are we talking about individual objects? I'm using the word object here as a teaching thing, something that you will perhaps use in the classroom, a class exercise, a presentation on how to formulate the subjunctive, whatever it is, how to conjugate a verb, actual things that you would use in teaching in the classroom. I was at a talk, I was in the audience of a talk by somebody from the US talking about these, and he was talking about their 2,500 modules, right, which got shock horror from a lot of the audience. But what they're talking about when they talk about a module is what I will be talking about when I'm saying a learning object, a handout, a presentation, something like that. Whereas we tend to call a module in the UK 3 weeks of teaching over 10 weeks. That's a module, right? But for this person from the US, a module meant literally an object. So the vocabulary is a little bit culturally specific there as well. So making possible what we're doing here, the reuse or remoulding of course reading lists, essay questions, lecture notes, slides, seminar discussion topics, and focus on providing a better learning experience for your students. The students also can access these themselves, which is the other spin-off. So they can use them to study autonomously or amend them to their class learning. They're also there for when they leave. Yeah? Once they lose their login and they're no longer a student, they still have access to the teaching materials. And again, repeat, they are available out there for other people to use. So you have issues here about how you're going to package these things up. Are you going to have a full module? Individual lectures? I do all these things. Seminar discussions, topics and readings, learning objects, exercises, work as handouts. These are all generally released as PDFs, but in my project, which I'll show you shortly, they're also bundled up in an open document format as well, for a variety of reasons. Up here I've got on this slide, open education resources versus open educational learning objects and micro OERs, another one that I'm going to introduce now. That's Davil's section from my student, and I'm just going to run you through the differences with these and the significance of the differences of them. The original plan for my project and the others was to create a single large open educational resource, like a resource, through a virtual learning environment or something like that. As the Open Education Resource Programme in the UK progressed, issues came up about reusability and repurposability of the material, and they became much more prominent and much more problematic. We fell back on what had been learnt through the virtual Dutch programme, and then the issues about the integrity of the individual OERs or how they are integrated together in a wider package are questions that need to be addressed. And the focus of the programme shifted towards the creation of smaller units of learning objects, breaking down the large resources into smaller, meaningful chunks that can be used in a classroom setting. The individual objects were released as PDFs, quite normal for open education resources because they'll open simply in a browser, they don't need anything to make them work. But a PDF is not open at all, is it? It's locked, it's flattened, it's squashed down. So strictly speaking, it contravenes the whole idea of openness and repurposability in an OER. In our collection, they come bundled by the module with the original source files in open document format. So yes, you can download the individual PDF of a lecture slide, of a reading list or class handout, but you can also download a bundled file in open document format. That means quite simply that you can alter, adapt, repurpose, change the material in a way that's not possible with just a PDF. Bundled up together with that is instructions on how to do that for the less technically able, and also open source office suites that you can use to do this. What we're finding is, because of the enormous quantity of such materials, there's a need for new approaches with this, to get professionals together with practitioners to understand that there's an emergent area of application for the reshaping, reusing, and remixing. Micro OERs is something I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. But before that, sustaining, big issue with all of our projects. Investment, academic culture, suitability, repurposing. A lot of investment, certainly in the UK, has gone into the creation of these resources, and it'll really be wasted if a relatively small amount isn't set aside for sustaining and maintaining these. If institutions wish to sustain their open education resource programs, they need to incorporate the production and use of the learning objects into the current business models, if I can use that expression, standard operating procedures, and the existing academic culture. This seems to be where the barrier is. Further, if reuse and repurposing is going to be encouraged, then they must be released in a format that allows repurposing and editing. In other words, not simply putting them out there as a PDF. That doesn't work. For sustainability and to encourage reuse, OERs should be, as they are in our project, released in an open, future-proof, XML-based format, such as open document formats, ODTs, and things like this. Users can then re-edit them in, you can re-edit them in Microsoft or a Office package like that if you wish, but you can download open source alternatives, LibreOffice, and use this if you wish. In addition, for those that are less technically proficient, you need to include documentation in there as well. Documentation about how this can be done, what tools can be used, how they can be re-edited and repurposed. And it needs to be actually attached to the open education resource, along with licensing details and, importantly, more on this in a minute, metadata to make sure the resource is found. What you need to try to do, and what we are trying to do, is to develop a community around this, around the use and reuse of open education resources, include it in the training of the new educators, and as a result, it should become part and parcel of their normal workflow. Widening the reach. Making them free does not make them available to all. I'll leave the quote on there, favourite one of mine. Right? Another challenge is providing access in the developing world, which was part of UNESCO's original plan. And these are often areas of poor and often expensive internet connectivity. It's parts of the world that do not have the resources that we do. Making your resources freely available and online doesn't make them available to people who would often benefit from them most. Once out there, they're only really freely available to the connected world, which is expansive but is not universal. What we need is materials not that look great on the newest smartphone or iPad, but ones that display effectively on low-cost mobile phones and incorporate simple and widely used technologies. Materials should be optimized for the lowest reasonable employable technology rather than the fanciest one, and we should not assume that the users will necessarily have the same resources that the creators of the resources do. A few more issues. The more you develop these, the more problems, like everything else, that come up. And there's a list of them for you, that without putting too much thought into it. One major issue is if you're putting these things out as individual units, you then lost the context. They have no context. The MIT OpenCourseWare delivers a complete program packaged up there for you, off the shelf and ready to go. But a user of a repository such as Jorum or Humbox, which are the two major UK ones, they're generally looking for a task to give their students, some examples to use in class, perhaps some teaching slides or something like that to supplement a class or lecture, something to aid the students' understanding. Firstly, the resource needs to be found. It needs to have adequate and relevant metadata attached, rich enough to describe the content, but at the same time, it needs to be sufficiently focused to avoid the user being overwhelmed with relevant results. Once it's been found, there is no context. So you need to include information about how it fits within the program, module, teaching session, or task-based learning. This information needs to be included at the object-based level. What is the assumed context? What is the assumed level that the student's at? At what level is this pitched? Who's the audience for this material that's going out there? You've also got issues with assessment. If it's going to be used in a credit-based program, then you've got problems with assessment. You've also got problems with different cultures. Different cultures have different learning styles, different attitudes to change, memory, and also aesthetic tastes. This needs to be considered as well. And those go far more deeply than just simply translating them into a different language. When you're adapting materials, learning materials for another global area, it needs far more than that. And that's also true even if the language is English, where English has become the lingua franca, as a localization of content needs to be compensated for cultural differences and variations, particularly in areas of graphics, symbols, layout, and other variants. Color is an interesting one as well. Cross cultures, lucky colors, unlucky colors, and stuff like that. And then once you've done all this, you've still got the contentious question of ownership and the relationship between the original author and the product at the end, if it's particularly been adapted. Huh? Lots of money has gone into the creation of these resources, and we need to put money also into their sustainability. We can measure the download. We can get download statistics exactly the same way as we can with electronic journals. But just because somebody's downloaded it doesn't mean it's actually been used, read, used in teaching, repurposed, reloaded, whatever. But what you're contributing here is the growth of knowledge. In an academic institution, in a university, it's what we do, isn't it? Yeah? So you're contributing to the growth of knowledge, the teaching materials you're putting out there, and you're asking people, please take these and please improve them, adapt them, correct any of my errors and typos, and then put them back up there. So that way it becomes an iterative cycle, and it's almost analogous to peer review. If you're putting the material up there and it's got mistakes in it, then somebody else can correct them, change it, and reload it up there. Interesting. Just moving on to a few more examples, and I'm focusing on my home institution here for a bit before I move on to others. And just to give you an example of UCL on iTunes U. iTunes U? Okay, wonderful. Lunchtime lectures. iTunes U? Okay, you're going to put these things out in something that's dependent on a proprietary format. Okay, I'm sure it's a really good idea, but okay. Particularly when you can just do this, right? And UCL have now got their channel up there, and you can have video clips, and there are many, many video clips up there under UCL's brand on the channel. But this really stems from the success of YouTube. The big, how can I say this? The reason that YouTube is so successful is it works without you having to do anything. You open your browser, it works, it plays. Switch the sound on, you get the sound. You don't have to do anything, because the formatting is done at the upload stage. No matter what format you load it up in, it's transformed by YouTube into a simple format that people can use. Yeah, Digital Humanities at UCL indeed has some material here, and there at the top you'll see me. Same badge, different jacket, well, a different shirt too. And this is a promotional video for our, you've all seen this, haven't you? Yes? When you looked up to see who I was, you went straight to YouTube, didn't you? Put my name in, okay. You'll find lots of other stuff if you put Digital Humanities up there. You'll also see one of my students, Greta, has her own collection of Digital Humanities. I just want to point to this fella here. who I almost didn't recognise because he looked so smart in this one. I thought, that looks like Elton, but it can't be. Yeah? And yes, it is. I'm sorry. So I didn't know you were going to be here, and this was already in the presentation. I couldn't take it out, but I thought I would just point to it. This guy here, yeah? So if you go to YouTube and you punch in Do Humanities, you come up with Greta's, and you'll find all those ones there. If you just put Digital Classicist in there, lo and behold, you come up with this series from last year. Very well done. We're recording ours in London. They've not yet found their way to YouTube. I need to have a discussion with Gabby about that, about how we get them loaded up into YouTube. But very well done for that. So now we have Digital Classicist on YouTube. Excellent. If you actually go to the UCL page for our centre and you look at the studying at UCLDH, that's actually the same video, but that one just looks, when you blow it up, like I'm blowing a kiss at the cameraman. So we got the change to a sort of corporate branded one on there. I really didn't want that image on the teaching page. But this is our one. The timing on this is 4 minutes and 42 seconds. The producers recommended 4 minutes max, but we had a lot to cram in. And if you watch it, it's dynamic. It features lots of jumping around, students walking around, so it's not static. A typical lecture, when you video it and put it up online, guess is 45 to 60 minutes. According to Nielsen, talking heads are really boring because we get easily distracted. Having said that, he was writing in 2005, so it was probably when we had the BBC, with people sitting right in front of the screen. And his recommendation is to make sure that the video is not static. This is one of the reasons that the TED, we all know and love the TED talks online, they generally keep them down to 15 to 25 minutes, and that explains why they move around, which I'm not going to do for the camera, but this is why they're always running up and down on the stage, to stop you falling asleep. Yeah? One of my students, thanks to Mahony, was doing some research at the British Museum, and she came up with their top most viewed videos from January to April in 2013. Unsurprisingly, the number one was Life and Death in Pompeii and Herculaneum, so it's an advert for the exhibition there. That had 76,000 views. Estimated viewing time 47 seconds, and a total length of 59 seconds. So most people watch most of it. The next one, making a glass fish replica. Haven't had the pleasure. I'll go and watch that one. 48,500 views, with an average of 5 minutes viewing time, against a total length of 8.5 minutes. Okay? So we're sort of losing interest the longer it goes on. The next most popular, Hidden Treasures in Afghanistan, 40,500 views, average viewing duration of 1.5 minutes, total video lengths of 3 minutes. Point here is that we have a short attention span. We tend to watch the beginning of these videos and not the whole thing. Anybody still watching now? Perhaps, we'll see. Okay? This will become relevant in a minute, because I just want to introduce Davil's section. This is Davil, one of my master's students from Digital Humanities program, who's just graduating now. He works as publications manager for this bunch here, Video Lectures Net. They won earlier this year, United Nations and UNESCO Award, I'll spell it out there for you, for the best educational project of the decade. Okay? Video Lectures Net is the largest open education resources free and open access digital library of academic talks. You've probably never seen them because they're mostly scientific stuff. Yeah? I'd never come across them before. But their content has been built up across European research projects based in computer science, and some other content from OpenCourseWare partners. They have, if you go to their website, covered 850 events, more than 15,000 lectures. They have 17,500 videos, mostly science, all out there under Creative Commons, non-commercial, non-derivative licenses. Go and have a look at their website. That's where the data comes from. Every time I go there, the figures go up and up and up. The next slide is with acknowledgement to Davor, who was actually talking here in Berlin, November 2012, so last year, at the Languages and Media Conference here in Berlin. And this was in his role as working for Knowledge for All Foundation Limited. Davor was one of the students on the Digital Humanities program, and one of the modules they did was Introduction to Databases. They were learning PHP and MySQL. So being a good student, he thought he would supplement his learning by signing up for a Coursera MOOC, a massive open online course. And this is what he found. This is the bit that we've extracted really for this one. And all this information is publicly available, and Jennifer Wyden from Stanford is the coordinator from this Coursera module. And Davor found that there are 108 accounts on there. These are people signed up for the Introduction to Databases course at the winter of 2011. He had to do it in term 1, so that's why the date is winter 2011. 475,000 assignments have been submitted. And breaking down the video downloads, 3,150,000 video views from those 1,008 accounts. Yeah? So extremely heavy use of video. It seems that that's all the students do. They watch the videos on there and perhaps nothing else. But the question it raises is videos actually what the students want? Do they actually want that rather than having the handouts and the PDFs of the course lecture notes? Do they actually want to watch a video? Perhaps not 45 minutes. Okay? The other thing to throw in there is the statistic from YouTube is that YouTube claimed to have 100 hours of content uploaded every minute of every day. MOOCs, 3 million accounts across the world. Yeah. So Davor's company are involved in initiatives specifically around videos. Again, open courseware, something in the region of 20,000 courses out there, and there are some groups, organizations who specialize in video capture. Massive lecture capture systems, the big one he introduced me to is OpenCast Matterhorn project, which has 700 participatory universities. Again, this is mostly science stuff. Massive portals that specialize in video lectures, VLN, Polymedia, and another two on there. With in the region of 25,000 academic videos between them. This is Trans Lectures page. And to quote from there, we capture the audio and transform it into text. They have a team of people who transcribe the audio files from these into text files. More on this in a sec. They have partners. I'm on the right slide. Yes, I am. It's down the bottom. Okay. They have partners across Europe, and they are endeavouring to. They're transcribing the text, and they're also in partnership with machine learning. Okay, the plan is to take these and to segment the videos and audio into small bite-sized pieces. So forget about the 45 minutes or 60 minutes, but have 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes of the core part of the lecture, the core part of the talk, splitting it down into individual things like that. Yeah, their partners represent the fields of language technologies, machine learning, and also audio-visual services. So the plan is they've got subtitles there, then have transcriptions, translations, personalization, contextualization, descriptions, fragmented. And they can fragment all these, and this is what they're working on at the moment. And they're just almost up to 16,000 academic talks on there. looking, as it says up there, on to develop low-cost, effective solutions to produce accurate transcriptions of the video lectures, and then have those translated as well. So you'll be able to select from the various languages that you wish. The status at the moment, according to the last report I saw, is they've completely transcribed the English lectures, 45,000 hours, bunch of team running for 2 months doing this. They're currently segmenting them, and they're experimenting with protocols to evaluate intelligent interactive approaches for the users. And very, very importantly at the bottom, they're having a user study, user testing, and human evaluations for the second round. So they're developing tools for transcription and translation, deploying the tools in OpenCast Matterhorn system. Business plan is a bit of a sticking point, I think. They need to figure out how to generate income out of this to make it sustainable in the long term. They have the funding to do this. It's another question of sustaining it after it. They're extending, the languages they're using are mostly Western European, but they're planning to extend the language set to include Chinese and Hindi. And of course, David, by the way, I probably didn't make clear, but he's from Slovenia, so he's pressing hard to get them translated there. The point is, again, that videos, the audio files and the sound files are data, so they can transform it, cut it up into small-sized, bite-sized video chunks to be displayed in a platform, freely, openly available, and with the text translated into many different languages. I've got a link on here. This is a recent publication by Davor, which is really a small independent project he did under my supervision over this last term on the whole concept of creating what he calls, and this is his term, micro OERs, small bite-sized audio clips with subtitles. Apparently, what people want. That should be the two main UK repositories for open access resources are Jorum and Humbox. Here's Jorum. What happens if you look in these repositories for resources for classics teaching? Search for classics in Jorum, and indeed you do find some things. Podcasting the Ancient World, but this one, Essay Writing in History and Interdisciplinary Studies. Classics? Not really, is it? Scroll down further, and sorry, what was the total number of hits? It was 62. You get 62 hits. Sorry. A lot of these ones are generic language courses, grammar courses, prepositions, time and place, patterns using infinitives. This is teaching English grammar. Very useful, but again, it's not classics. This, by the way, is a new website with improved search functionality. So we're not quite sure. I've had a discussion with somebody at Jorum to figure out why these are coming up. We're not quite sure, or they were not quite sure. They seem to be because these are listed under linguistics, which will be cognitive with classics, are not too separate from it. But there isn't classics as a tag attached to it. And the word classics, if it appeared within the text, it would be unlikely that would be picked up. It will be somewhere in the description of the actual unit itself. Go to Humbox, which is where all my material is. Put classics into Humbox, and you get 64 hits on there. But interestingly, the same thing comes up. These are not classics at all. And there's one guy here that's known to Matteo and I, and this is Brett Lucas, that used to share our office as well. And I know him well, and he worked for the English Language Subject Centre. So he pops up there under a search for classics, which is strange. Not quite sure again what's going on there. If you scroll down those hits, you get things on religion, on discourse, on literature. I slightly suspect, like this one, Maud Arthur Oxford World of Classics, and that's picking up the word classics within the content of the text. So this is an issue. How do you tag these things up? The search system is supposed to be looking at the tags, but here it's clearly looking at the content, the text within the content. If you go down far enough, you do actually come up with some ones that are tagged classics. And if you were to open this, you have a screen with the metadata accompanying it, give you a little bit about the background. And this is from Matt Philpott from the Institute of Historical Research in London. And this is images. He was working on an art historical project at the time. And these are the images in there, which are clearly views of ancient Greece, Lion Gate at Mycenae, this type of thing. Apollo Epicurus up there. And so they're actually tagged with classics. So they're coming up, but they're coming up way below the other ones, which is curious. If you put in classical studies, it becomes even more curious. Because top of the list, you get Gabby, right? Well, actually you get me, I'm sorry. This is one of mine. But this is a slide, this is a slide presentation from Gabriel, where he's talking to my students about open source and open access. I guess it includes the words somewhere in there, studies and classical, but I'm sure they're not linked together. Again, we have Brett Lucas here. Big shout out, 2 shout outs for Brett so far. He's in there on the classical studies as well. So, what I thought I would do in preparation for this talk and another one I'm giving in the new year, hopefully, was I wanted to remedy that, and I wanted to start putting together a collection of resources openly available out there. I've got digital humanities, but really I'm looking at classics resources. So I started this page on the Digital Classicist wiki, putting together a collection of teaching and learning materials that are fully open, freely available out there, under an open Creative Commons license. And research on the types of teaching materials that are available for classics. The first one, of course, I always think about is Perseus, because it's a student's friend when I was a student, first one that comes in there. But what I'm finding is that there are many projects, right, rather than resources in the sense that the material that I was using. I'm not saying it's one or the other, I'm saying these are 2 different things. First response actually I got was from Elton, so hence we've got Hestia and Pelagios and Classics Confidential in there, because he was the first person to email me back. But I went for a community approach on this, and I sent out a request to all the mailing lists, just mailing lists, the Digital Classicist one. For classics more generally, I use the Liverpool just mail list. There's an open education resources discussion list, and social media, of course, I put something on Twitter and I put something on Classics International on Facebook, and I've been gathering those together and we'll be putting them up there on that page. But what is really interesting is the difference, right? Broad-based versus a granular approach. Open courseware, such as MIT and Coursera, and on the other side, open education resources in the small objects that I was describing before. And now I'm going to include in that micro OERs as well. Now, again, it's this tension, if you like, between the learning objects and the programs. And I came to the realization after going through all these, actually it's not a competition. And I'm not driving people to create these resources. But when I'm looking for stuff out there for teaching, these are just different things. It's not that there is a competition. It's not that one is better than the other. They are just different. They are 2 different things. We've got MIT OpenCourseware, we've got Coursera, we've got OpenLearn, and then we've got Open Education or Open Access, as Open Access resources. And these are different things. So to complete the survey, I thought I'd do the same things with those that I did with Humbox and Joram. If you put classics into Coursera, you actually get this one, Classics of Chinese Humanities, so there actually is one thing that comes up on a search in the Coursera course page. Interesting. If you put in classical studies, you get nothing at all. If you put in Latin, you get one course on Latin American culture. Yes, you got it, right? If you put in ancient Greek, actually one does come up. You get this one, The Ancient Greeks, at the Wesleyan University. These are all US institutions, right? So you could actually, but again, this is a course you sign up for, and you follow the course as a student, learning and submitting assignments and having them marked and reviewed by your peers. Anybody doing a Coursera course? I sort of think that's what happens. Okay. My colleague Ulrich signed up for one to see what they were doing. I signed up for one, but one evening was enough for me. That's not a criticism of their material, it's just a statement about my workload and the time that I've got. So the next one, go and have a look at MIT OpenCourseWare. Actually, you do get a surprising result on this one. Again, I've embedded all the URLs on these are live, so you should be able just to click on the slide and it will open, or you can do your own searches. Classics, you get 3,970 hits. But most of these, I give you a sample at the top there, Classics of Chinese Literature, Fundamentals of Biology, DNA Structure, Classic Experiments. So it's picking up classic in this sense. But you do get classics in Western philosophy with the standard Plato and Aristotle before Descartes, Hume and Kant. So that's got some classic stuff in there as well. That was surprising. Classical studies, you get 6,320 hits on that, on the Coursera one. And again, some of them are, this one's classical rhetoric. There's a lot of repetition. This is the same course code. It's picking up the same word and it's giving you multiple results of the same thing. But then also classical mechanics, a computational approach. So it depends again on the way in which the word classics is actually being used. If you search for Latin in this one, any advance on the figures for the last one? Okay, the other one you only got one for Latin American Studies in Coursera. This one you get 3,770 more courses which have Latin American something. So it's picking those words up there. So how hard is it to actually find something that you want in something like this? Ancient Greek goes down a bit. You've got 417. And again, there's an ancient world which is tagged up with Greece and history, so it's picking up on the tag Greece there. Humanistic perspectives on medicine from ancient Greece. Again, we've got Greece in there, we've got Greece in there, that's the same one there. So it is coming up on there. But again, these are courses that you follow as a student. So what about the teaching materials? I guess you could sign up as a student, and if they all were released under appropriate license, you could download them if you wished. OpenLearn was interesting because if you try to go into classical studies, you search classical studies, you come up with this, which is a word cloud. You click on one of the links and it will give you the associated words with that. If you scroll down the page, you get this, and it shows you a selection of the modules. You may or may not be able to see it from where you are, but what is very, very good here, it gives an idea of the level, intermediate level, duration, 15 minutes. So that's only a small object, right? This one here, MA in Classical Studies, 1,800 hours. That's a full master's program. Yeah? So just from this screen, you can see what you're getting involved in. You can see that is a small object. This is an entire module. Okay? Intermediate level, 4 hours. So, I don't know, a couple of lectures. Introductory level, 10 minutes. Advanced level, 600 hours. Okay, whatever. But if you get my point here, you're actually getting more information before you go into it. This is what you get in Humbox. A screen, if I'd have opened it up for you, you get a pane with that data, the metadata in there, where you do on mine, telling you the level, what is the audience. And it also links to the rest of those for that there. So that was interesting and very pleasing as well. And what was more pleasing was when I delved a little bit further, yes, those are either objects or courses, and the courses you have to register. One of the things that's very interesting with OpenLearn is that the Open University published data 2 years ago to show a causal link between the two. The popularity of the Open Learn freely available courses, by tracking the users and the subscribers to that, it was increasing the numbers of people who were signing up for the same or equivalent course. It was a paid get a certificate at the end of it one. So this was actually impacting quite a lot on their recruitment numbers across there. But there's a lot more. If you could find it on OpenLearn, right? There are many resources that are available with appropriate open licenses, particularly in the language learning. There's also taster materials for classical studies, and also for the ancient Olympics. And I've got the page on here. And again, as the other one, you've got an idea of the number of hours involved, so you know what you're letting yourself in for. But you can, this is clicking on one of those links, getting started on classical Latin. It's got the share-alike, non-commercial attribution license on there, which is the one that we like to see. And you can download that and use it in your own teaching if you wish. Okay, so how do we draw all these things together? Well, there is a search engine, which is allegedly an open education resource search engine in the UK, based at Nottingham University. It's called Expert. That you will get marginal results with. You try searching for classics, we get some results that I'll show you, but my resources are all tagged up with the module named DHOER, and they're not retrieved at all. If you put that into Expert, you get no results, so it's not universal on there. But if you were to put classics, you would get the Oxford podcasts and a few more in there, which are on there. This is the search results for classics under Expert. You get quite a bunch of stuff coming up there. Doesn't give you an overall number, surprisingly, but you will find ones like this, Oliver Taplin on classics, which is part of the Oxford ones there. So you've got podcasts. What is Tragedy is the one we saw there. Stuff from the Beazley archives, and also material from the Faculty of Classics. I am told by email that this was mainly part of the JISC Higher Education, Open Education Resources Strand 1 that I was referring to in one of the early slides, but I never found it under those. I actually looked. The first place I went to look, and I was looking for these materials, was the JISC OER strands, the first one on 1-2. So I'm not sure how I missed that one. But as such, all that material is openly licensed, and you see the very, very small CC one down there. It's got the Creative Commons license on there. So this whole issue of discoverability is very, very important. Having the consistent and appropriate metadata is an absolute must. You need to have the appropriate license on there as well. You need to be able to find the resources, so you need appropriate metadata for that. You need descriptive metadata. You also need discovery metadata. You need to know where this place fits within a course. Where does this learning object fit? What's the intended audience? Who's it pitched at? Are there any other resources that go with it? Or is it a standalone? All the things to think about. I just want to give a shout out for some new initiatives. I started off with Perseus in the Classics one, but now of course we have the sons of Perseus. So we have the Perseus platform, collaborative editing platform for source documents. And of course Alphaeus as well, reading tool for Latin, Greek and also Arabic. Well done to Greg for that one. Eladios, grammatical syntax searches on the Perseus tree bank. I'm not going to talk about these other than to indicate that they're there. Two reasons. One, that Mary Claire Beaulieu was talking in the Digital Classicist seminar in London about the teaching with the Perseus platform, so that's online. You can go and have a look at our pages and you can see the video of her talking about that. And also I understand the folks from Leipzig are on this program in a few weeks' time, so I'll leave it up to them to talk about those. But that's a shout out. I couldn't come to Berlin. I'm not shouting out to our friends down at Leipzig as well. So just to finish up with, the final slide is a reflective slide also. It's the thinking. What are we getting out of all this? And really, to a great extent, it's reflection on our teaching practice, on what we do as educators. Discussion around this whole area of the use and reuse of open education resources, granular approach versus the other approach, the huge approach, does have one significant spin-off benefit, and that encourages us as educators to talk about and reflect on our teaching process and the part that digital resources and digital tools play in this. OERs are, or they should be, pedagogically driven, and as should all teaching resources. And whether they're used or not, they stimulate a discussion on and research into the learning process and our pedagogical aims. They become, to an extent, an agent of change and objects to talk about, giving us the opportunity to reflect on what we do. There's no single solution to any of this, questions we've raised here, but we need to work across institutional and disciplinary boundaries and continuously push those boundaries. And we do this by research-led teaching. I've finished up with the page I was putting together on the DigiClass Wiki. Do please, if you're members of the Digital Classicist community, you will have editing rights. Do feel free to put material up there if you wish, or please send it to me. The only stipulation is that it must be open licensed, and that's all. The final slide actually is just to do with pushing the boundaries a little bit, because when we go and give talks in the digital humanities community, we're generally speaking to other people in the digital humanities community. If we're talking about classics and we're going to a classics conference, then we're talking generally to other people in the same field of classics. What the Digital Classicist as a community allows us to do, allows us to go to Digital Humanities Conference and talk about digital classicist stuff. Yeah? And it also enables us to go to Classics Seminar Conference and talk about digital humanities stuff. So it's an area that allows that crossover and that synergy. And so we're not always talking to the same audience, because this is often the problem with conferences and seminars. As we know, when we go to the DH conferences, the digital humanities ones, they are all generally of the same opinion. So you're not really pushing and stretching the boundaries. In London, we have at Senate House many different seminars. There's the Institute of Historical Research, Institute of English Studies, and of course the Institute of Classical Studies. We have the Digital Classicist seminar here. You guys have the Digital Classicist seminar here, great. And next year, going to be talking at Nottingham for the Classical Association main conferences. And I'll give you this, which is Mary Claire's talk and the link on there. And also the best bits of today's talk you will find in this volume. Shameless publicity, I know. And I was quite rightly asked by Matteo, is it self-archived? And the problem is I was relying on my colleague Uli to do this, and we have not had the go-ahead yet, but yes, it should be self-archived. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for not leaving the room. Thank you.